knows when you make it.
Okay, here we go.
Ready to go? All right, welcome everybody to the regular meeting of the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission. This is Wednesday evening, March 8th, starting a little bit late, which I'll mention why in just a moment. Let's start off though with the pledge. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Meeting, we're having some technical issues, so there's no no public access to video at this point, but there is audio. So ways to participate. There are a couple people in the audience and they can complete yellow request slips or scan the QR code at the back. If you're participating remotely, I don't know that we have access to the raise hand feature in Zoom because we don't have video, right? So can they do? But can we see it and know to call on them? Okay.
Alvin, you're on. Can you raise your hand? Okay, yes, you can raise hands.
Excellent. Okay, so anybody who is on Zoom, you may not be getting video from us, but we can see your raised hand. And so when we call for participants from the public, you'll be able to do so. Very good. If there's anybody on the phone, I don't know that that is the case, but you can press *9 to raise your hand on the phone. And then when called upon, press *6 to unmute. When we see presentations, my understanding is the presentations, you'll get the audio. The video will be available here only in the chambers, but will then be posted by hopefully tomorrow or the next day in a place where the city, where public can see it on the city's webpage by going through there. All right, the first item on the agenda is our consent calendar. Actually, I'd probably technically call the roll call, excuse me. Yeah, the recall. Oops.
Commissioner Narita?
Here.
Commissioner Riddlemeyer?
Here.
Commissioner Robbins?
Here.
Commissioner Rowinski? Here. And Commissioner Michaels?
Here.
Great. Thank you very much, Cookie. Consent calendar is the first item. And the only thing on the consent calendar, the minutes from the last meeting. Any questions, comments, edits to those minutes? Can I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of approving the last month's February minutes, say aye.
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 Done. Minutes are approved.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you very much. Next item is public comment, and these are comments on any item that's not on the agenda. And do we have any speaker slips or hands raised?
I see no hands raised for items that are not on the agenda.
And no public comment, yellow slips either. Very well. Let's move on to technically old business, but the first item there is the bicycle and pedestrian projects update. And Sue Ellen is going to give us a presentation there. Pardon me, I'll be more formal. Sue Ellen Atkinson, who's the principal transportation planner and a welcome part of this commission. Thank you.
Chair Robbins. Thank you for having me this evening. Again, Sue Ellen Atkinson with the Public Works Department. I'm here to present the bicycle and pedestrian program update. So we'll be going through an update on infrastructure projects, planning projects, and grants. First, we wanted to walk you through kind of the road that we've traveled since the adoption of the 2020 Bike Master Plan. So what you see here is a map of our existing bicycle network when the 2020 Bike Master Plan was approved. Since that time, we have made headway on constructing projects from the plan. First up was the 5th Avenue bike facilities. Then we had the 28th Avenue Bicycle Boulevard. And the 28th Avenue shared use path that was constructed as part of the 25th Avenue grade separation project. We had the North Central Bike Lanes project, which constructed bike lanes on Humboldt and Poplar Avenue. The North San Mateo Drive bike lane project, complete streets project on that roadway. The Laurie Meadows buffered bike lanes. Connection at South Humboldt Street from 5th to 9th Avenue for bike lane continuation. And then finally, our Pacific Avenue bike lane. So we are steadily making progress on implementation, and we'll go into some of our in progress projects at this time. So first project that I'll talk to you about is the Delaware Street Safe Routes to School Corridor. This is a project that was fully funded through Caltrans Active Transportation Program, or ATP funding. And this will implement a Class 4 separated bike lane and bicycle boulevard on Delaware Street from 19th Avenue South to connect at Pacific. Current status, we had our CEQA documentation finalized late last year, and the design allocation funds, so approval of the funds that we were awarded for design was approved by the California Transportation Commission in December 2022. So currently staff is preparing a request for proposals for a consultant team to assist the city with the design of that project. And that will include the community engagement portion of the project as well. Next up is the 28th Avenue Gap Closure Project. This is the small area that's circled in blue on the screen for those who can see it. And this project is funded through a grant from the San Mateo County Transportation Authority. The grant covers design and environmental review for this section of 28th Avenue from Edison Street across El Camino, connecting into the Caltrain station. The agreement for design services was awarded in September of last year. And currently, we've conducted all of our internal kickoff meetings to start work on the project with the consultant team. We did a walk audit with our technical advisory group, which you can see on the lower right-hand side of the screen. That group included representatives from police, Caltrain, Samtrans, the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition, and Caltrans. And the consultant team is currently working on the existing conditions review. In that same area, you can see that project area from Edison Street across El Camino circled right here. It's a short segment on 28th. We're also working on a segment on 28th, conducting traffic counts at 25th Avenue and 28th Avenue, highlighted in blue circle here. So that's to evaluate traffic patterns and volumes on those roadways, to evaluate if the feasibility for bicycle lane implementation on that portion of 28th Avenue, and also same for 25th, which is not shown here. Next infrastructure project is the North Central Bike Lanes project. The update on that is that we're continuing to offer overnight parking for residents at the King Center. On average, we're issuing about 10 permits per month for residents to park overnight. In terms of the residential permit program that the community was interested in, we are doing the data analysis for community survey that we had conducted. We did a post-project parking data collection in late 2022, and we're evaluating that data, and we'll provide update to the commission and city council later this year on that. Next is kind of a grouping of projects in the pavement management program integration. So that's pavement management projects that are occurring where we're able to integrate implementation of bike facilities. So a few projects underway through that effort. In the Smooth Streets Phase 3 project, we're implementing the Sunny Bray Bike Boulevard. Construction on this project is slightly delayed, and we're expecting the bike improvements to be striped this summer. Second up, citywide street rehabilitation package 3B phase 2, Pacific Boulevard. So that implemented class 2 buffered and standard bike lanes. Those bike facilities were completed. The only outstanding item on this project is signal modifications, and that equipment is expected to arrive shortly. And then a new project for inclusion here is the 4th and 5th and railroad crossing improvement project, which will include class 2 bike lane on 5th Avenue. And that project is slightly delayed. We're expecting the contract award April 1st for that. Another infrastructure project is the Community Development Block Grant fiscal year 2022 to 23 allocation. So this year, the project funds are being utilized to address about 4,800 sidewalk tripping hazards within the CDBG boundary, which generally is the North Central and North Shoreview communities. Total funds for that project is about $450,000. The notice to proceed was issued in February 2023, so they're underway on that construction. And they're utilizing a really innovative construction technique where they're able to minimize the tripping hazards with very little disruption to the community. So that's ongoing. 4,800 sidewalk tripping hazards will take quite some time. So the community will likely see workers out there for several months. Next up is a larger project that's new to our infrastructure projects list. So that's a 19th Avenue Fashion Island Class 4 bikeway. This is a joint project that we're excited to work on with the County Transportation Authority and Samtrans. So this is part of the 10192 interchange project, and Samtrans and the city are partnering with the Transportation Authority to add multimodal elements to that project. So we're looking at the feasibility, design, and construction of a class 4 bike facility that was proposed in our bike master plan on 19th Avenue and Fashion Island. And that'll be implemented with smart corridor elements and will connect to a future mobility hub that will hopefully be the future home to Samtrans express bus routes at the existing Caltrans Park and Ride under the 10192 interchange. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of the area, that long black line is where we're expecting to have the class 4 bikeway. The potential future mobility hub is located beneath the interchange. So we had discussed the projects that we had already completed that are shown in solid green here on this map. The projects that are in progress, we're laying over that in dotted line. So as you can see, we are continuing to make progress on implementation of the 2020 Bike Master Plan and evaluating the council direction on designing and constructing the future facilities. So shifting gears to planning projects, one that you're very familiar with, the Transit-Oriented Development Pedestrian Access Plan was adopted by City Council in November 2022. So that will now shift into identifying funds to implement and construct the projects listed in the plan, I'm sorry. Another planning project is the Complete Streets Plan, which you'll hear quite a bit about later tonight. This is a new comprehensive multimodal plan. We awarded the contract to the consultant team in the fall of last year. And we have kicked off the project and we'll be discussing current progress in the next item. And then in terms of a grant update, the Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant Program issued a call for applications in January. Staff is currently preparing a grant application for a comprehensive downtown transportation prioritization and curb management plan. And that application is due tomorrow. So we should hear sometime during the summer about that. And just as a reminder, we do have our bicycle project webpage where the community can follow along, cityofsanmateo.org/bike-plan. And we do try to keep that updated with our current and upcoming projects, as well as our interactive map that shows the same information about completed projects and future projects. So with that, I'll conclude the staff presentation and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Sue Ellen. We'll break it down the usual way. We'll do questions, and then if there are any public comments, then we can give comments and feedback. Any questions? I'll start with you and Commissioner Michael.
I don't have questions. I do have a comment, or should I?
I would hold the comment,
Okay.
please. Yeah. Commissioner Owinski?
Sue Ellen, what is a curb management plan that's being proposed for downtown? What is that?
So that'll be part of the plan that we're proposing is curb management, which is a way of looking at parking, loading, and how we're using our curb space. So if we're using it for ride hailing vehicles, if we have certain locations where food delivery vehicles can park, if we utilize parking as a flex space for either parking, for dining, for entertainment, that sort of thing. So it's really how you're managing that area that's right against the curb.
Right, and that area against the curb is parking,
Currently, for the most part, yes.
right? And it could be at times that the dropping off or picking up of, stuff,
Correct.
right? Okay, so it could be, it's just looking at that whole process and trying to figure out what's most efficient.
Correct.
Probably
And what,
from a circulation perspective? Or?
yeah, and what
Or-
meets our current and future needs? Because we do have needs for commercial loading downtown. Is it
Right.
possible to share those spaces? We do currently have ride hailing vehicles, Ubers, Lyfts, et cetera.
Right.
And we have food delivery vehicles. And we do see that some of those vehicles double park while they're picking up or dropping off. So are there ways to accommodate that loading, short-term loading, specifically for those types of services, such that they're not blocking traffic?
Sure. And that I think is really important for our businesses. So it's one thing to make sure we provide to the best we can adequate parking for their customers or potential customers, but also, like you said, the ability for them to pick up, drop off materials, including Uber or any of the ride hauling entities as well.
Correct.
Okay, and then we'll get an update on that later on the curb management. Here's a question I have is 19th Avenue, the 19th Avenue Fashion Boulevard and the Delaware are all class 4 bike lanes. They're both class 4 bike lanes.
Correct.
Do either one of those projects remove on-street parking, curbs, sidewalks?
We don't know that at this time. The first stage is the feasibility study, which has just recently kicked off to look at design alternatives for the roadway. So there are options for how to utilize the existing space, and that it's currently utilized by bike lanes, parking, vehicle lanes, turn lanes, et cetera. So going through the feasibility study will determine which ways the existing right-of-way could be utilized and what the trade-offs for that might be. So we'll come out of it with several alternatives and possibly a preferred alternative.
Right. So the Delaware project, which is a class 4 bike lane, that's well on its way. No, it's in the feasibility stage.
There are two projects in that area. Delaware Street is going to kick off design shortly. That's the ATP funded project
Right.
along Delaware. The 19th Avenue Fashion Island project is going into
Yeah, they're two
feasibility.
separate projects, but they're
Correct.
both
They're
class 4.
connected.
Yeah, they're both
Correct.
class 4 bike lanes. So my question is for either of those projects, it sounds like we do not know yet whether there will be an impact on on-street parking or sidewalks.
That's correct. At this time, we're too early in the design and feasibility stages for both.
For both of those projects, okay. Because, and you're going to hear this from me when we talk next on the next project as well. If we are going to start to lose on-street parking or affect sidewalks, but particularly on-street parking, then residents need to be brought in very, very early in the process, unlike in North Central, which I'll ask.
Commissioner, if you would try and stick to questions, that's a great comment, but you'll have an opportunity
Okay,
later.
all right.
Through the chair, I see that Azalea is raising her hand. She might have something.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, to answer Commissioner Lewinsky, to answer your question about the process, as you all know, we have quite a few lessons learned from North Central.
Yeah.
And so what is being proposed here is a process so that you can all see what options we have. And to Sue Ellen's point, from that, give a recommendation on a preferred option. So that will be a different process.
Right. Okay. One last question, the 28th Avenue, that little extension, I see 28th is a bike boulevard. Will that extension be a bike boulevard as well?
The current gap closure.
Yeah, the
project?
gap closure, yes.
In the bicycle master plan, the segment from Edison to El Camino is proposed as a class 4. So we're evaluating feasibility of that. And then across El Camino would be an intersection treatment.
Okay. So that's also, okay, that's why I asked the question. I did
Mhm.
notice the maroon coloring versus the orange coloring on the bike boulevard. Okay, all right, so the residents, if we lose parking, we'll get that notified very
Yes,
early.
They've
Okay,
been identified as stakeholders for outreach.
okay, all right, thank you, that's it.
Yeah, I have one question that might help everything, then I'll wait, come back after we go down, which is just, it's more of a request for some of our newer commissioners and any of the public that don't know. Would you maybe just briefly describe the differences between class 4, 3, 2, and 1?
Sure. Class 4 is the highest level of separation for a bike facility. So that's a physical separation between the cyclist and the vehicles traveling on the roadway. So that's in a quick build format, that's plastic delineators. And in other more complete build outs, it's planters, it's curb, a raised bikeway that's not at the same level as the road, that sort of thing. Class 4 ended up kind of out of order, actually. Class 3 is the lowest level of protection. That's a bike boulevard. So that's a shared facility with vehicles. You'll see the sharrows or shared use arrows on the roadway, usually with traffic calming techniques added as well. So like on 28th Avenue, we have speed cushions, we have curb extensions to slow vehicles that are sharing the road with the bicyclists. Class 2 is a striped bike facility. So just either one stripe of thermoplastic or a wider buffered area to separate bicyclists from the vehicles. So there is an element of separation there, but it's paint and could be traversed. And then class 1 is a shared use path. And so that's a pathway that's shared between bicyclists and pedestrians. So for example, the Bay Trail is a class 1. And then the north side of 28th at the Caltrain station is also a class 1 shared use facility.
Thank you very much. And I hate that they're out of order because I can never remember that, but that's life. Commissioner Riddlemeyer, questions?
My question was just answered, so
Oh.
no questions.
Commissioner Narita.
Thanks. Thanks, Sue Ellen. And I sent in one question to you earlier, and then I would just want for the records for the public to know about it. So my question was, it's been amazing seeing all of these projects come online, and some of them are reaching, a year or over of having been implemented. And so similar to my question from last commission meeting last month, is there a plan for the city to review how it's going for drivers, for users of the various bike lanes, and get feedback accordingly? This is beyond just like a parking issue that I know we have that as an ongoing agenda item for the future, but just like an opportunity for review and any adjustments to designs accordingly.
I think that I'll defer that to Azalea for response, as that's a
Sure.
departmental priority.
So a few points. One of the bicycle master plan had many objectives, one being safety. And so the goal of was implementing, a bicycle infrastructure. One is to promote it, to make sure that our streets are complete and multimodal, and for residents to feel safe. So part of the effectiveness of our bicycle network, one is it a network? And as you see from the map, we don't have the ability to implement a network, immediately. The approach has been more segmented because of the lack of resources and also looking at opportunities with other projects. But we need time to assess, effectiveness as it relates to to safety. For some of these locations, we had very high collision rates. And so our analysis will involve assessing if those, collisions have over time decreased, and if our implementation of these efforts have actually addressed, one of the key elements, which is safety. So it will take time, given that we don't have, full network, and that we are in the process of collecting collision data.
Thanks. And you mentioned in the email back, Azalea, that in May, Public Works is presenting to council on traffic management.
Yes.
So I just wanted to let the public know that's very exciting also. And that the data that you're mentioning, is there any ETA on when that data would be available? Because you did mention that it would come to the commission and to the council, but is that that's not like on the crystal ball, right?
It is. So
It is? Oh, cool.
meeting is
I missed
scheduled
it.
for May, and I know that there's a lag. Maybe Sue Ellen, can you speak to the lag in terms of how we obtain collision data? It is on the latest in terms of what we have. It is on our website, but there is a lag in terms of that data getting processed and ready for uploading on our website. I don't know if you have more details on that, Sue Ellen.
Yeah, all of the collision data is uploaded to the state, and they're typically at least a year behind. So in looking recently, the most recent data set that I can access is 2021. So many of our projects had not yet been implemented at that point.
Yeah.
So just to give you a sense of that, that's what the type of time lag that we're working with.
Got it. That's really helpful. So like we shouldn't anticipate data with the bike lanes right now until like 2024.
And that would be for essentially 1 year of data.
And that's only 1
Typically,
year.
we're looking 5 years back, for example.
Got it.
Or an average of 5 years.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was my question.
All right, I just have a couple. One is, we all know that the North Central bike lane project raised a little bit of controversy. Has there been continuing complaints, or did you have a sense of, is that still controversial to your knowledge, people coming to the city?
I'll defer to Azalea to answer that question.
So we do know through our mayor that there is a desire to reevaluate the installation of the bike lanes, and we are working on, developing an outreach process that not only, takes a look at the improvements in the area, but also we're focusing on how we can re-engage with the community and address some of the concerns that were raised through this process, like, pedestrian safety, access to Caltrain. And so part of this process is to re-engage and assess what other needs there are, and to talk about, the effectiveness of the bicycle lanes, how parking is being managed, what options we have to supplement parking. So we will be re-engaging and having, that conversation, as well as the conversation on improvements that are desired and needed in the CDBG area, which includes both North Central and North Shore View. So it is a large area.
Right, thank you. But other than from the voice of the mayor, have we actually gotten any significant number of concerns or complaints lodged directly from either neighborhood association or individuals?
Not directly to staff.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Lastly, is there an ongoing, I know prioritization is always tricky, right? It's a question of dollars. Are there shared opportunities to do other things? Are we reevaluating the priorities over time in the plan, or is it sort of static and then we turn to what we can?
Just to clarify, the prioritization for the projects that were identified?
Yes. Sorry.
That is static because that was determined by the data inputs, the level of traffic stress on the roadway, the collision data, et cetera. So that the inputs generally don't change. So we are maintaining the priority levels for each of the projects. If there were drastically different circumstances, we could reevaluate if something needed to move up in the priority list, but for the most part, we are maintaining that list as is.
Well, then what I'll call the practical priorities, as opposed to how they're listed because of perceived need from the data, do we reevaluate occasionally, formally, this is an area that the money's about, there's a pot of money we can go to, even though it may be a lesser priority, but there's money for it, or we're gonna dig up the roads anyway, so we're gonna do it.
More so the latter.
Okay.
You'll see that the projects that are aligned with the pavement management program are not necessarily working from the top down in terms of
Okay.
prioritization, but if you're going to be striping a bike facility, if you're going to be putting thermoplastic on a roadway that's going to last several years, you want the roadway to be in really good shape. So when we are rehabilitating the roadway, we have a splat service. It's a great opportunity to put a bike facility that's going to be in great condition for several years. So in the sense of the practicality, if we have the opportunity to do it at a time when the roadway is being reconstructed or slurry sealed, we do act on that because there is a cost savings in already having the construction crew out there, et cetera. And so we do certainly do that.
Okay, thank you. And I believe Commissioner Owinski had another question.
Sue Ellen, what is the status of the Hillsdale Bike Ped Bridge over 101?
We had applied for grant funding to assess the feasibility of the prior design of reutilizing the existing overcrossing or looking at another design. We were not selected for that funding. So at this time, we don't have a project underway to look at if the prior design is feasible or another alternative. It is one of our higher priority projects.
Right.
So with the new council priorities, when they're finalized, if the direction to implement high and medium high priority projects is still on that list, then that project would remain there.
Right. Oh, okay. So that project has not been ranked yet?
The project is ranked in our 2020 bicycle master plan. We do have both the separated bike ped overcrossing, and we also have an option for incorporating a bicycle facility on the existing overpass.
Right. Okay. But it's not medium or high.
I believe it's medium high. I would have to look at that.
Okay.
I
All
can
right. I'll
confirm
look
and
on
get back to
the
you.
bike plan. Okay. All righty. But I hear it because I do remember our conversation about applying for a grant for this, and it has been denied. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Cookie, do we have any speakers, either hand raises or yellow slips?
I don't see any hands raised. Oh, I do. Bree Myers. I'll unmute you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, commissioners, for allowing me the chance to speak. I'm a member of Move San Mateo, a resident of 19th Avenue, and I'm also the PTA president of Sunnybury Elementary. And I just wanted to thank everyone for their commitment to making the roads safer for everyone, not just with the bike lanes and the cyclists, but the pedestrians, the parents walking their kids to school, the kids walking themselves to school, those riding electric scooters, and even my neighbors who choose to run in the bike lanes. Often during high traffic hours, when people are going to school or people are coming from school, the sidewalks are busy. And so you'll see cyclists in the bike lane, but you'll also see runners in the bike lane. And so I know there's been a lot of concern regarding parking and bike lanes. However, I feel like bike lanes are just kind of even the term bike lanes is like a disservice to how many people use them. I've even seen people move their dogs if there's they don't want to see, they have a dog they don't want to get near, they walk their dog even in the bike lane. And so I just wanted to, I know that this sustainability and infrastructure committee meeting is primarily on all of this transportation. I just wanted to thank you all for your commitment to making the road safer for everyone. And trying to find that balance to making everyone happy regarding parking and sharing the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other hands raised or comments?
I see no other hands raised.
Okay, so I don't have to worry about the 3-minute limit, which I was going to impose, but no need. Thank you. So I'll bring it back to the commission for any comments. Just to remind everybody, we're just supposed to receive an update. We're not voting, but obviously any comments or feedback, I imagine, will be appreciated. So start back down here, Commissioner Michael.
I just wanted to mention that interactive map you showed. I looked at it before the meeting and found it very helpful. If it could just be made larger somehow on the website so we could see the street names better, but it was really neat how you could click on the different segments and see where they're at and what project it is. So nice job on that.
Commissioner Owinski.
Mine is my comments is going to be related to getting business and resident feedback very, very early in the process. I like the curb management plan, but we're going to have to get input from our downtown businesses early. As soon as we have some feasibility plans, bring them in because they are part of the feasibility. We don't want to go through this and then bring them in at the end. They have to be brought in very, very early. And that would also go for the 3 class 4 bike projects, Delaware, the 28th Avenue Gap, and the 19th Ave and Fashion Island Boulevard. Once again, if that's going to impact parking or delivery of products to businesses or residents, they need to be brought in very, very, very early. And when I say brought in, reached out by the city, possibly individually. And I'll talk about that in the next section.
Thank you. Commissioner Riddlemeyer, any comments?
I just want to thank you for the work you've done on this. I love seeing more bike lanes and I'm looking forward to seeing more connectivity throughout the city so that people don't have to rely on cars so much for those, you know, getting to and from school, to and from work, small errands, whatnot. I think public outreach early on is really key. And hopefully they'll understand the multi-benefit of these lanes, which I think, as the caller said, calling them a bike lane is not necessarily the best thing. I mean, I know that's what we do, but yeah, I've seen multiple people on feet, strollers, everything, using these lanes, and I love to see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Narita.
Thanks. I love these quarterly updates. They're great and incredibly rewarding to see the progress now that it's been, 2 years. I've been on the commission for almost 2 years now. I can't even remember anymore. Pandemic messed up my sense of time, but it's just been incredibly rewarding to see the progress and to really feel the implementation every single quarter when you give these updates to Ellen. So thank you. And from last commission meeting, I had shared feedback that the Pacific Avenue bike lane had like one of the, for cars, it's very confusing around Hillsdale because one of the thing, there wasn't like an indication of like, can a car turn right by on Pacific, close to Hillsdale area. And now my husband reported to me and wanted me to share in the commission meeting that there's a sign now that says it's only for bikes. And that was really cool that he felt, that the feedback was heard. And so I just wanted to thank Public Works for taking that. And we saw it in our community, progress and action. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I wish I could say, Sue Ellen, that you get to leave, but you don't. So our next item is complete plans and complete streets plan, rather, excuse me. One thing to add, I neglected in the last time, particularly for the newer folks, is not only are we the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission, we're actually sitting as the city's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And we don't actually have to change hats or anything, but that is our role, and that should be in the record. And we take it seriously. So now we'll have a presentation on the Complete Streets Plan. And this is something where, again, we're not voting, but we're expressly asked to provide feedback with a focus on the community engagement portion. So just keep that in mind as we listen, please, to the presentation. Staff, thank you. Oh, hello.
I get company up here for this one. Chair Robbins, Commissioners, again, Sue Ellen Atkinson, Public Works, and Principal Transportation Planner. For this item, I'm joined by Carrie Modi from Fair and Piers, who are our prime consultant on the citywide Complete Streets Plan. So we're here tonight with a project overview and then an overview of our draft community engagement plan. And as Chair Robbins noted, we are hoping for feedback on the community engagement plan at the end of this meeting. Hang on. Now this isn't working. Okay, project overview. So first, we've come to you with a number of plans to date. So your question might be, what is a complete streets plan? So a complete streets plan is a comprehensive multimodal transportation plan. So we've talked about the pedestrian master plan. We've talked about a bike master plan. Complete streets brings all of those modes together and looks at a roadway and determines how to accommodate all modes. So transit, vehicles, bikes, pedestrians, micromobility. And so what we're looking at is a citywide view of how to bring together all of our existing transportation plans and our green infrastructure plan and figure out how to implement more roadways that can safely accommodate all modes throughout the city. And that in part is to achieve the goals that are being set out in our 2040 general plan. So in terms of what is a complete streets plan, it's how we do that. Citywide, it gives us what we need in order to go forward and do that. So in order to move forward from a plan and then have roadways where you can walk, you can bike, you can take transit, we need to have a plan that's implementable and something that looks at the existing right of way that we have in our streets and gives us things that we can actually accomplish with the roadways that we have. We don't have wide open spaces throughout the city. So we need to look at what we have, which is a network that's been pretty focused on vehicles for the past century. And looking forward, how can we achieve a network where all modes can be accommodated? This also can't be something that's just done from the top down, from city staff and a consultant team looking at the roadways and figuring out what to do. It needs to be a collaborative process. So that's external stakeholders, that's internal stakeholders. It's not just public works, it's police, it's fire, it's planning, it's parks. It's not just the city, not just the commissioners or the city council, it's also our whole community. So that involves building relationships with our technical stakeholders. So other jurisdictions, other agencies that all have technical knowledge that go into this, as well as the community at large. And it's about telling people what a complete streets plan is so that they can understand it and have real actionable feedback that goes into the plan. And it's not going to be without challenges. We don't always all agree on how to move a project forward, but it gives us the opportunity to have those discussions while we're working on that plan. So what does it include? I just said basically it includes everything. And it does in terms of transportation. So it includes vehicles and includes goods movement, freight delivery, transit. We have buses, we have trains here. What might we have in the future? It involves bicyclists and involves pedestrians. It also involves our green infrastructure plan, which the city adopted just a couple of years ago. What it does not include is sewer utilities. So basically everything except sewer. So in terms of what's going to go into this complete streets plan, aside from everything, it's true. Basically what we're trying to do is have the discussions as we're developing the plan. So then when we go move into projects, we're able to implement them more seamlessly. So first is looking at the multimodal network maps and how they layer together essentially. And Carrie will talk about this a bit more. So we have our bike master plan, we have our pedestrian network, we have our transit network, we have all of our roadways where we drive. How do those layer together and how do you prioritize across that? And that brings us to the citywide prioritization framework. Bikes are not going to be prioritized on every roadway. Pedestrians are not going to be prioritized on every roadway. There's a give and take, and that's where the prioritization comes in. The community engagement and capacity building we'll be talking about a bit later on in this presentation. Stakeholder process and the alignment is bringing together those stakeholders that we talk to. We're not always, again, going to agree. So alignment might be a tricky word, but having those conversations and making sure that the plan reflects the stakeholders. We'll come out of this with policies that we can apply to projects. So when we're building a project, having policies that we adhere to make sure that the implementation is aligned with Complete Streets. Implementation tools and next steps, priority project development, that gives us what we need in order to take this plan and actually go forward and implement it. So the next time we have a pavement project, we implement everything from the Complete Streets plan with that project. Rather than just implementing a bike facility, we can do a project that has impacts on bike, on pedestrian, on vehicle. We'll also come out of this with design guidelines. So that's really standards for when we're doing projects. And we'd use that as a city. We review those standards when we're looking at a private development project, for example, when they're coming in and saying our sidewalk is going to be X feet wide. We can say the city requirements, the city design standards say this, you need to meet that, so that any project that the city does, any project that private development brings to the city are all constructed in a way that align with our design standards. And that moves us forward to that Complete Streets goal. And finally, at the end of developing the Complete Streets plan, we hope to be at council adoption. So as I mentioned, we're going to have a lot of conversations about the plan, and there are pluses and there are minuses when we're moving into the plan. So a few of the opportunities that this plan gives us is the opportunity to have a plan where all of the modes are brought together. So rather than our discrete plans that we have right now, we have one plan that looks at projects that address transportation safety for all modes and brings green infrastructure elements in as well. Hang on. We have the opportunity to reduce our GHG emissions and meet our 2020 climate action plan goals. We have very ambitious climate goals for the city. The state has very ambitious goals for us. So building a roadway network where more people can choose to get around in ways other than driving themselves gives us the opportunity to reduce those GHG emissions. As mentioned, alignment with local, regional, and state plans and policies. This plan gives us the opportunity to align our circulation system with the general plan update, like I mentioned, the climate action plan, our regional transportation plan, and state policy like SB 1350. It gives us a great opportunity, which we might be really a little more excited about internally, to have clear design standards. So some of our standards are a little antiquated, and this gives us the opportunity to have design standards that move us forward to have the network that we envision, and gives us clear concrete standards that we can reference for both, again, city projects and private projects. It gives us the opportunity to prioritize across plans and modes. So for example, again, we have our bike master plan and our pedestrian master plan. Each of those have individual projects. We have a priority list in the bike master plan, but we don't know where priority 2 in the bike master plan sits next to priority 3 in the pedestrian master plan. So this gives us the opportunity to prioritize across all of it. We can start to address some community identified transportation related equity issues. So in doing a citywide plan and identifying priority areas for improvement gives us the opportunity to address some of those. And then I mentioned we have limited right of way, so we get to start having that conversation about what we do with it. But the plan is not without challenges. So first, that right of way again, we have very limited space in the city to do everything that we want, and we can't do everything that we'd like to do on every roadway. This is a very high level plan that's going to talk about projects that are implemented at the street level. So some in the community may not elect to participate in a big, broad-reaching citywide plan, but there may be a project that's occurring on their roadway that they might want to be interested in. So we'll do our best through the outreach to identify those projects, but it does get a little tricky when you're doing those types of plans. This funding for this plan is for the plan only. So again, we'll need additional funding to implement the projects. Increasing the number of ways that you can get around and the number of options for modes on a roadway might result in some roadway changes. So implementing bike lanes may result in reduction of travel lanes, for example. So there may be some changes to that people on different transportation modes will realize. We need to keep emergency services needs and requirements in place in mind as we're going through this. We want to make sure that we're maintaining response times for our fire and our police services while we're going through the changes in the plan. I'm behind a little, I apologize. We need to shift away from a vehicle-centric mindset, which is where the city does generally tend to be. When you're thinking forward about how you want to get around the city, we might need to think outside of the vehicle. And finally, building trust, particularly with underserved communities. We have had some difficult projects, and in going out for a citywide project, we want to make sure that we're building that trust with the community and ensuring that community feedback is reflected in the plan. So I'm going to try to breeze through this as much as I possibly can, because we're going to talk about the right of way. So this is a really wide roadway. I just wanted to talk about how some things, you have to slice and dice when you're dealing with limited right of way. So this has 82 feet available. This, for example, you could imagine Alameda, Saratoga. So we have a lot of space to work with in a wide roadway like this. So upper part is the existing condition. So that's got a lot of lanes for travel. It has parking on either side, kind of narrow sidewalks. Bikes are sharing the roadway with vehicles. If we wanted to make some changes there, we could add separated bike lanes and widen the sidewalks, I'm sorry. We're still maintaining one lane of vehicle travel. We're still maintaining parking. We have so much space here, 82 feet, we're able to play with it a lot. We could opt to give priority to transit and have transit priority lanes, have parking, and have sidewalks for pedestrians, along with a travel lane for vehicles. However, most of our roadways are a little more constrained. Like this roadway, it probably looks like a lot of the ones that we see around our neighborhoods, with one vehicle travel lane in each direction, parking on either side, and hopefully sidewalks. So that's about 48 feet that we have to work with. So again, the upper part of the slide is the existing condition. If we wanted to do the same as we did in that really nice wide roadway and add bike lanes, separated bike lanes, we'd need 64 feet. We can't just create additional right of way very easily. So that's where you see we can't just add what we want without possibly removing something or making other decisions. So you begin the prioritization. You might opt to leave the existing condition and focus on vehicle travel and vehicle storage with parking. You might opt to remove one lane of parking and try adding bike lanes, but you'll see you're still short by 3 feet. We don't really want to narrow the sidewalks to get that 3 feet, so we have to look at other ways to make that happen. So another option might be to remove parking on one side, widen the sidewalks, and add lighting to really focus in on the pedestrian realm and the pedestrian path of travel for this option. So you have options to keep vehicle priority, you have options to have pedestrian priority instead. Another option would be to remove all parking and add separated bike lanes. So you'll see with the narrower roadways that are more common throughout the city, we still have options, but we need to make some tough decisions along the way. So we've talked about what goes into the complete streets plan, what some of the opportunities are, the challenges. What is this plan going to look like at the end? And that's where I'll transition to Carrie to walk us through.
Thanks, Ellen. So one of the things, well, 4 things really that the Complete Streets Plan is going to do in terms of outcomes that we want to highlight this evening. First, there was a lot that Sue Ellen mentioned around kind of stakeholders and the need for kind of connections and building really champions, both internal and external, to make sure that the Complete Streets work is really going forward in San Mateo long after this plan process is complete. And so the internal working groups and external working groups that you may have read about in the context of the engagement plan will be a really critical part of the outcome of the study. In addition, the priorities and recommendations that Sue Ellen mentioned before, so getting all of the different modal plans that you already have in dialogue, that's a big part of what this plan will do. The design manual piece, which Sue Ellen mentioned, staff are particularly excited about to create clarity and consistency in how projects are implemented will be a big component. And then we're also going to further some of the project development for 10 of the high priority projects. And so we'll have what's called conceptual designs available to help kind of advance those towards grant readiness. And so Sue Ellen talked a little bit before about the different networks or modal networks, and I'll explain this a little bit here, but kind of how we're going to get to those 4 outcomes. First is talking about the draft goals, and I did want to share these with you all. These are largely from the general plan update work. It's a consolidation. There's a few more goals included in that general plan effort currently when it comes to circulation. But if you whittle those down, it's really about creating transportation options for people, providing safe and comfortable and efficient travel, making sure there's equitable mobility and access, and ensuring that there's inclusive engagement in the planning process. So those are really foundational to the Complete Streets Plan. And then we mentioned that we'll roll up those different modal plans, get all of those networks talking to each other and making sure that the relationship between same priorities on the same street are really actually we're planning for that and understanding what that would actually look like. And then that will lead to these kind of 4 outcomes I was highlighting on the previous slide. Next slide. We talked about this quite a bit, but we know it's not going to be easy. Limited right of way, as Sue Ellen went into in detail. I think those were some great examples of what those trade-offs are really going to look like and what trade-offs people are really willing to make in order to make sure that there's good and equitable transportation options throughout San Mateo. And then again, that interdepartmental and interagency collaboration is going to be really important. So that's both within the city of San Mateo, in addition to kind of external agencies, as well as the public. So there's all those different factors together that's going to be really important to dialogue throughout this process. In terms of the process and timeline, we're here towards the beginning of the project. We have yet to begin a community engagement, and so looking forward to receiving feedback from you all tonight that'll really inform how we get started on that. But we do have a quick pace of this project due to the grant funding deadline, which is in February of next year. So we will be doing a lot this year and speaking with you all several times. So we're in the existing conditions phase currently. We'll be looking to start engagement later this spring, as well as meeting with the first external working group. And then we'll move swiftly into kind of policies and goals, and then network recommendations, design guidelines, and priority projects. So we'll be taking more of those concepts back to you, more like the fall timeframe, things like that. And then the community engagement plan, I just wanted to provide a little bit of an overview here. You all had an opportunity to look in more detail in your packet, and happy to talk in more specifics of the Q&A, but wanted to give you kind of the key focal points of how we're going to get towards that more inclusive community engagement process. So these are the 3 goals for the engagement overall. So first, to really make sure that as many residents as possible in San Mateo are aware that this planning process is occurring, what the plan is, and really why it's important to all community stakeholders in San Mateo. We want to make sure that there's robust and diverse community participation throughout the process, and then it's really representative of the full range of demographics and perspectives and experiences in San Mateo. And we'll talk a little bit about that on a subsequent slide. And we want to build rapport and alignment among the community and city agencies by really repairing some of that public trust in the process and making sure we're contributing to making that kind of better. This gives you a sense of just kind of the engagement principles overall. So we want to make sure that there's a diversity of voices. We're really focused on building relationships and kind of co-creating with the community, lifting up underrepresented voices, engaging historically marginalized communities, making sure things are accessible and inclusive and welcoming for a diversity of languages and cultures and abilities, and really collaborating on ideas and solutions. This isn't a one-way street. This is really a dialogue and community-led. And then we want to make space for people to feel safe and comfortable when they're providing input, and then learn along the way. We're going to adapt and iterate, and we're going to be flexible as we go through this process as well. So in terms of target audiences, this isn't, by any means a comprehensive list, but I did want to give a sense of kind of what some of the kind of focal points are in terms of demographics that we're hoping to reach in San Mateo. So the first is underrepresented neighborhoods and low-income households. So this will include some of the neighborhoods such as North Central, North Shoreview, and Shoreview. These neighborhoods collectively have a much higher concentration of renters in particular. They also have a higher concentration of people of color. And so those are groups that we want to make sure that are adequately represented in the process. In terms of non-English speakers, about 19% of San Mateo residents speak Spanish at home, and about 16% speak an Asian or Pacific Islander language, primarily Chinese and Tagalog. And about 20% of residents describe themselves as speaking English less than well. And so it's really important that we are doing engagement in a language that people feel comfortable with and familiar with and would prefer to participate in. I mentioned the statistics on renters earlier, but about 46% of residents citywide are renters. So it's really important that we're not just listening to kind of homeowners, but making sure that we're listening to renter voices as well. Residents 44 years and younger is another demographic that we want to make sure that we're targeting, really making sure we're getting some of the kind of families represented and kind of student voices represented as much as possible. And these first four demographics are really consistent with a lot of the focus areas of the general plan too. So that's where a lot of this comes from. But we also wanted to add to that seniors and residents with disabilities. The 2022 community survey showed that residents 65 and older are increasing, increased about a percent over the last 2 years, about 17% of residents. And so residents over 65 will be important, as well as people with disabilities. In terms of some of the engagement activities, want to just give you a sense of like what these different activities are, and happy to go into more detail in the Q&A. But first, we'll be kind of kickstarting a lot of our work with stakeholder interviews. And so these are more one-on-one or maybe small group interviews where we're talking with different community organizations, perhaps church groups, maybe parent or school representatives, and really working kind of one-on-one to understand what the issues are and what they want to really see in this process. Focus groups are kind of a larger setting of that. So we may have several different participants in the room, or perhaps different representatives from related organizations, for example, could have a neighborhood focus to it, or maybe a different kind of topical group attached to it. We're going to do bike, walk, and transit tours. And this is something that we're really excited about because it's an opportunity to get a lot of different people together. So it's our intention to invite members of the public. It can be a great opportunity to invite commissioners or council members, other elected officials, and really get people talking about the different issues. And then hopefully do that on a variety of modes too. So riding the bus together, biking, walking, doing a lot of these different travel modes together. And then throughout the whole process, we'll have interactive online engagement using a platform called Social Pinpoint. So it'll be a website, and there'll always be some sort of interactive feature along at the various stages of the project that corresponds to the kind of in-person engagement that we're doing as well. So that'll always be available if people don't want to participate in person, just want to participate from the comfort of home. Pop-ups are another kind of in-person engagement technique that we've been using a lot and have had a lot of success with. These are kind of essentially mini workshops where we're maybe taking a table and some materials out to community members, trying to go to high traffic locations. So it could be the farmer's market, it could be a park on a Saturday, it could be anything like that where we would expect to get some really good foot traffic for San Mateo residents, and just trying to stop people in the course of their activities and get them talking about travel in San Mateo. And then we'll also use kind of carefully some public workshops as well. So these are more events where we're hosting it, the city's hosting it, and asking people to come to us, which can be a little bit more complicated in terms of getting good turnout, but is option that the city has used in the past before. So we'll have these as another opportunity to get, again, kind of broad citywide participation as well. So just wanted to give you a sense of kind of the kind of schedule and phases of the timeline before I pass it back to Sue Ellen. So first, this phase one is kind of what we'll be looking at this spring. This is really talking about existing conditions and needs. The community has already talked a lot about existing conditions and needs, right? From many different planning processes, including freshly with the general plan. So we want to do a little bit of still plenty of work, but perhaps a little bit of a lighter touch here, really focusing more on those small group conversations, as well as casting still a broad net or casting a wide net with online engagement. And then we'll rely on those past planning processes as well to feed a lot of that need. And then we want to really make sure we're having a robust conversation when it comes to getting all the different modal networks talking together. And so this is when you'll start to see in phase two, more pop-ups, more public workshops, more hours talking to people out in the community, and in addition to focus groups and those tours that we had talked about before. And again, online engagement are always in the background. And then the third phase is where we get into some of that more tangible kinds of improvements that I think people will be a little bit, it'll be easier for them to relate to a little bit, because we're talking a little bit more concretely about the street level improvements when it comes to the concept plans, and then also the prioritization of things across the city. So we'll continue to use a lot of in-person investment and kind of time there, looking at pop-ups and public workshops, still hopefully looking to some focus groups, and then having the online engagement as well in the background. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Sue Ellen to kind of wrap up and talk about the discussion.
All right, so we did throw a lot at you about the project. So we wanted to focus the discussion, if that was helpful, and give some discussion questions as you're going through questions and comments. So first, does the commission have any general questions about the community engagement plan or about the plan's approach as a whole? Second, are the proposed engagement activities varied enough to reach enough users citywide? Are there any activities that you'd suggest doing in lieu of any of the ones that are proposed? And third, are there additional stakeholders that the commission recommends including? So we can have this slide up during conversation. With that, we'll conclude the staff presentation. Thank you, Carrie, for being here tonight. And Carrie and I will be both available for questions.
Great. Thank you both. Let's do it the traditional way again with questions first. And so really we're talking about item one on these three items, and then we'll see what, if anything, is from the public, and then we can go comments that can be more far ranging. I think I'll start at the other end this time. Commissioner Narita, any questions, please?
Yes, thank you. We're okay. Thank you. So I sent some questions into Sue Ellen and Azalea now, and the wonderful presentations have inspired others. So I just want to delve a little bit more into some I sent on email and the new ones. Could you, and maybe Carrie, this is for you, could you like outline in a little more detail what exactly does co-creation mean when it comes to the San Mateo Complete Streets Plan?
Do you want to maybe reiterate your answer but first, and I can dive in more? Okay.
So when we're talking about co-creation, I'll take a stab at it and Carrie can fill in. We're talking about engaging the community throughout the process. So it's not just the city creating the plan, it's hearing the community and incorporating their feedback into the plan. When we're looking at the focus groups, for example, and co-creating those, we are going to be engaging the stakeholders early in the process, and the stakeholders have the greatest knowledge of their audiences, so they can help us with building relationships to host those focus groups, for example, or understand how to best outreach to their audiences. So that kind of a dual meaning of co-creation. So both the plan overall, but also engaging and building those relationships to help us develop those focus groups and the avenues for outreaching.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have much more to add to that, but I think we're really excited to really understand what people are interested in and how they want to drive the process. So that's a big part of how I'm viewing co-creation in the context of the engagement plan, is really kind of learning and centering that information that's coming from community members and using that as kind of an organizing factor in how the plan process proceeds.
Great. And Carrie, I cheated and I asked Sue Ellen, like, what is the experience of fair of this, consulting group? And you guys have done the City of Oakland and City of San Jose complete street plans.
Yeah.
And so in those experiences, I was curious, are the number of focus groups, the number of pop-ups, the number of workshops proportional to what you guys did, in those other bigger cities? Or how do you determine these numbers? Because I 10 stakeholder interviews, 12 pop-ups, 4 workshops, 4, I didn't memorize it, 4 tours. Like, how do you decide these numbers?
Yeah. Good question. It's an art, not a science. The other 2 plans you referenced actually didn't have as much stakeholder process. So I think it's really exciting that San Mateo does have that much as part of it. Sometimes they tend to be a little bit more internal looking, more thinking about kind of staff processes, almost like organizational issues to some extent, which was to some extent the case, in Oakland and San Jose. And so here I would say relative to, the size of the city of San Mateo, both, by population and geography, that those numbers are kind of right for a citywide plan of this scale. There is, of course, that staff discretion and input from community members, like some shifting that can occur between those things. And so if there's a particular format that's like working really well, we should pay attention to that. And like, that's what I meant kind of about being adaptable. It's like, we should really learn from what's working, what's not working, and try and repeat the things that are working and see if we can kind of make that work going forward in the process as well. The 4 different or a handful of different like tours, for example, trying to get one in for each mode. Some of the pop-ups also may have more hours attached to them. So there's a bit of like nuance to a lot of those too, but we're most confident and excited about things like that are real opportunities for conversation. So the stakeholder interviews, the focus groups, pop-ups, I think we found to be effective before. So those are some of the things that we're most excited about, because just based on our past experience, that's where we've gotten kind of the best conversation and the best amount of participation in the process.
That's great. And I'm sensing in the kind of outlines of engagement, there's the stakeholder interviews, which sound like, for instance, a leader of a church could theoretically be in the stakeholder interview to connect the city with residents and interested parties. And then there's just these pop-ups and these workshops that say anyone can go. Like if you just so happen to see the sign, you can come in and participate.
Yeah.
I'm curious, for the first group, for the stakeholder interviews, is there an opportunity for continued engagement? Because you can imagine, like, they might not have the technical expertise that the technical advisory group has, but they are community leaders and in some way more engaged. Sometimes I'm making generalizations here, but more engaged in my experience on plan developments than like a parent who can't get out the door,
Right.
which is me, participating in something like a workshop. So I'm just curious, how will the stakeholder people continue as a through line?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there's maybe a couple different ways we could slice it. So right now, and this is probably what you noticed, those are consolidated in the existing conditions phases, and we're not currently proposing them in the latter 2 phases. Again, that we could add follow-up on those, and it would just be about kind of saying, okay, where would we want to kind of pull that time from? Another way to maybe think about their involvement is perhaps there's a creative way to kind of integrate them into one of the focus groups that was planned for the 2nd and 3rd phases of the project. And then there's also just the kind of basic level of like making sure that someone's calling and emailing those people to make sure like, hey, we're going to be at this pop-up, near your neighborhood on this date, is there an opportunity to come and dialogue about that? And those are conversations that we could have in the course of doing that other work as well. So there's flexibility there.
That's great. Yeah, I'm just trying to think about ways to create nodes of influence, right?
Yeah.
So that a parent doesn't have to attend the workshop, but that parent can feel confident that through a trusted party, their feedback would have been heard by the city, right? So
Exactly.
something more distributed. You mentioned, Carrie, and I didn't realize this in the material, so this was cool new information, I thought, that the Complete Streets plan will include 10 priority sites. Did I hear you correctly on that?
Yeah, so we're going to include like 10 concept plans. And so essentially that's, probably likely to be the top 10 kind of priority projects. And then we want to get basically something that's like trying to push that forward for grant readiness. So some sort of kind of cost estimate, some sort of sense of like what the project is, kind of advancing it from maybe like a line on a map to saying like, well, here's the cross section of the street or more information like that so that the city could advance that and hopefully get like funding for maybe a corridor study or even design money for the kind of next phase of the project.
And then Sue Ellen, is there a sense of like, we have a sense of what those 10 sites are, or like maybe we have 30 sites and we're going to prioritize the top 10? Like that's all cool new information to me.
We don't have a sense of that yet.
Okay.
We are very, very determined to let the process play out. So while we know where we have certain hotspots for safety, perhaps, we need to go through the layered network process and see how everything floats out, and then determine where those top priorities are. And I know staff is really excited to see how it comes up, but we're not pre-informing the process by pre-prioritizing.
That's great. Where in the timeline would the priorities start to crystallize such that then you can make these option plans and package things nicely? Because the timeline just seems insane.
There's a lot to do. So I would say that the priority conversations are probably going to be happening like, yeah, we can pull up the schedule, but kind of like late summer, early fall. And then we're going to really hit the ground running on developing some of those concepts. So that will be our primary work plan. We're calling that Q3,
priority
but
projects.
that's
Okay,
really
thank
like
you.
the fall.
I missed that. Okay. Okay, got it. So wait, so priority projects means that they'll already be identified or that they will be identified and the conclusion of the identification would be sometime in Q4.
Yeah, I would say like maybe the beginning of that bar is probably the prioritization process, and then moving to, okay, we've agreed. And here are the projects that we're actually going to be developing. And so that'll be more like the bulk of the work in the fall and kind of wrapping up into the winter.
Okay, just quickly, I know it's a comment, but let's bifurcate these in future presentations because that'll
Sure.
be helpful. Thank you. And then
through the chair, if you
Yeah.
don't mind, the next time that we expect to be back to the commission is, oh, I lost my pointer. Conveniently right about that time.
okay, so the presentation will be, hey, through this process,
Mhm.
we have 10
Correct.
10 priorities. Okay, thank you. That's super helpful. Hold on. My phone went back to where my questions are. Do we have funding for the, you mentioned, the presentation mentioned certain opportunities where participants will be compensated for their time, which is a great best practice for community engagement. Do we have funding for all of that compensation, or is that funding needed?
We need to confirm with our grantor if that is possible under the grant funding.
Okay.
So that's to be determined right now.
Okay, I hope that is. And if it's not, that's very foolish. That was a comment, sorry. When we have the Complete Streets plan, and Sue Ellen, you do a Herculean effort right now, identifying various grants for bike and ped, for instance. Does the Complete Streets plan open up additional sources of funding that are unique to Complete Streets for implementation? Or is it that the grants that you are applying for instance, with bike ped could also somehow, get other things like green infrastructure shoved in, or like how does that look when you actually think about how to fund a project from a Complete Streets plan?
That's a good question. The requirements for grants and the way that applications are reviewed and approved for funding changes with each cycle. So for example, where certain projects may have been funded 5 years ago, now they don't have enough elements in order to be considered for funding. So it's possible that in the future grants will require a full Complete Streets approach where a bike facility only may not be a good candidate for funding. A Complete Streets project may be. I think that the grant opportunities that are out currently, a Complete Streets project that includes more than just one mode would be more competitive per se than one of our projects that's, for example, a pedestrian facility alone.
So it's like a higher quality project
It's
application.
It's possible.
So, okay, gotcha. And then my last question is about the green infrastructure piece of the complete streets. So can you explain what green infrastructure on a complete street exactly is?
I'll give it a shot. So green infrastructure are the elements that can lend into our stormwater system. So for example, on 28th Avenue and the curb extensions, you see the landscaping in there and that helps with water filtration. So for a complete streets project, you might see a separated bike facility and the physical separation is a curb with landscaping that helps with that filtration process and the pervious surfaces that are included in that roadway.
So would these kinds of green infrastructure projects theoretically help in like a flood situation?
That I would have to defer to Azalea on, and she's very helpfully raising her hand.
Okay.
So I would say that they could, but the primary goal of green infrastructure is really to address our PCB and mercury issues in San Francisco.
Okay. Got it.
The areas would have to be extremely large to, you know, have a big impact, but they
Like
could
a bioswale, right?
right, bioswale. So they
Okay.
could have, you know, they definitely help. But I just want to make sure that the expectations, you know, that doesn't mean an area will no longer flood under an intense storm, but it definitely, they do help. But the primary focus is really to address mercury and PCB. That's why
so
we
the-
have our DI plan.
And Azalea, just so I'm super clear, the mercury and PCB, it's by the filtration that the green infrastructure is providing that Sue Ellen mentioned, that's filtering out the mercury and PCB.
Yes, exactly. It's
Okay.
making sure that those constituents don't make it to San Francisco Bay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
All right, Commissioner Riddlemeyer, any questions?
Thank you for your presentation. I love seeing this, and I love the green infrastructure is included in there. And I hope that we can find a way to make enough space on the roadways to include that. I'm wondering, you mentioned the several different options for the constrained right-of-way, the 48-foot roadways, which are most of what we have. At any point, do you foresee maybe making one-way streets to free up some more space? Or have you looked at options where maybe on one road, there's a bike lane going one direction, and on a parallel road, a bike way going the other direction, different configurations like that?
Certainly, those are options for looking at those constrained types of right of way. Had I put more examples in the presentation, you might have not enjoyed that. But yeah, we do certainly have the option for one-way circulation where it's feasible and where it makes sense. You know, if you have one way in one direction, you need a couplet in the other direction. You need to look at vehicle volumes and what that's doing to other roadways. But that would be something that we could consider where it was feasible.
Okay. Thank you. And as far as the interviews go, can you tell me a little bit more about how many you plan on conducting and the process for the interview? Are these structured interviews where you're asking set questions, or are they more open-ended, free-flowing type of interviews?
Yeah, we just began to work with Swellen to kind of create an agenda and set of questions for those. They are structured interviews. So our sub-consultant, Winter Consulting, will be conducting those. And it's a set of questions about kind of how people travel and how they get around. What are the observations that they're making about their communities and about the places that they're traveling in within San Mateo. Understanding some of the barriers too, just whether that's, maybe why they don't ride the bus today or why they're not able to drive, just kind of understanding some of those different factors that are, often personal. And then also trying to get a better sense of like what they're observing, what they're hearing from their neighbors as well. Does that kind of answer your question on kind of structure?
How many?
There are 10 currently planned. I think they may or may not be like fully one-on-one, like we may have a couple people in those interviews or kind of community representatives. So that part we're still figuring out currently, but there will be 10 interviews.
Okay. And in the packet, it mentioned different stakeholder groups you're going to be reaching out to. And I'm curious about the neighborhood associations. How do you plan to find those and connect with those? Because as somebody who's founded a neighborhood association, our association is not on the city's website yet. And I know that there's another association that's been founded after I founded mine. And I doubt that that one's on there. So I'm just wondering how you're planning to connect with those.
Yeah, so we do have a long stakeholder list that's the basis of which is coming from the general plan. So we're trying to use as many lessons learned and kind of resources and connections from all the work that that planning team has done so far. So that's kind of the basis for a lot of those. I don't know if you can speak to more specifics on maybe who's in or not and currently on the neighborhood associations.
Yeah, I was going to say that feel free to send me the information and we can connect you within the city to who maintains that website. But the city does maintain contact information for as many neighborhood associations as possible. And to Carrie's point earlier in the presentation, a lot of neighborhood associations do focus on homeowners. So at the same time, we want to make sure that we're reaching either organizations or community-based organizations that renters are more primarily a part of to hear their voice as well.
Right. Well, my neighborhood association does include renters. So yeah, that tends to be the trend now because there was quite a stink that a lot of them had the name homeowners associated with them.
That's great to hear.
Yeah. And then also just another stakeholder group, I'm wondering, you mentioned it briefly, but schools and maybe PTAs and ELAC groups as well. I'm wondering if those are on your list.
Yeah, they are. So we're planning to talk to, well, we have school district representatives on the board. We're also reaching out to someone who's involved in Safe Routes to School on the kind of county education. So we have a couple different kind of ways we're kind of looking to get connected on that front. But that could be a great opportunity for a focus group or something like that, where we're getting kind of maybe some different school communities in dialogue and understanding some of those needs specifically.
And if I could add to that, the city is in process currently interviewing for our part-time Safe Routes to School coordinator, who will be part of our team and therefore be engaged on this project. But that person would be a direct liaison to all of the school communities in San Mateo. And we would hope that through that person, we would be able to share the engagement activities that we're doing as part of this plan with the school communities more directly.
Okay. Yeah, speaking of the Safe Routes to School staff that you're looking to hire, a lot of this outreach will be over the summer. Do you think that that will be timed correctly, that that person will be able to coordinate?
I think that our community engagement is spread out enough that we will be able to have that engagement. The schools here are through mid-June and then start again in mid-August. There are often school personnel who are around during the summer and hopefully can connect us with PTA members or other school community members during that summer timeframe. But we do have a very broad schedule of engagement plans. So I think that we'll be able to bridge that summer gap.
Okay, great.
And we are also kickstarting things, I mean, pretty quickly here. So we're going to council in 2 weeks' time. And so after that, we really intend to kind of get going, incorporating the feedback from you all. So we will have some time to get engaged before the school year is over as well.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Commissioner Owinski, questions?
You pull up your, can you go to your slide deck, please?
Right, with the 3 items that you want.
With the 3 items, and then I'm going to move back and forth between all of them. But if you go with the 3 questions that you had. Okay. I'm going to talk about additional stakeholders first, but I want to go back to the meeting packet on page 18. It says, who will we engage? And on there, there's community-based organizations. What are they?
So a community-based organization is often a kind of nonprofit group or some sort of otherwise kind of organization that provides some sort of direct assistance or kind of association to different community members. So they could be, you know, based on a geography. Sometimes they might be some sort of social service provider or health provider. It could also just be like some sort of after-school organization for kids. So they can really have vast kind of range of focus areas. And then we do have a kind of list of those from the stakeholder list of kind of who the general plan folks have engaged. And so we do have a kind of more specific list if that's, something that
Sure.
the commissioners would like to review more specifics.
I'm going to go back to a point Commissioner Rodemeyer brought up, neighborhood associations. My neighborhood association's got a lot of renters like yours. And I'm surprised that they're not included under community-based associations, organizations, no, CBOs?
I think we're still intending to reach out to neighborhood associations. I think, well, I was referring to the community-based organization definition that's a little bit more broad that typically incorporates more nonprofits, but we are intending to reach out to some of the neighborhood associations as well.
Okay. And you have here the small business community. How are you going to ID those small businesses? Because that's very important. Do they lose parking spots? Do they gain parking spots? Goods delivery, drop off, pickup? So how are you going to identify them?
Yeah. So again, I think one of the challenges with this plan is going to be this kind of tension between this being a citywide plan where we're talking at kind of high level about policies, but then at the same time, we are also talking about real lines on the map and real projects at the end of the day. So we are intending to reach out to businesses early on, but I think one of the ways where it may feel a little bit more connected, frankly, for some of the small business owners is going to be when we're talking about those 10 priority projects, for example, that we were referring to earlier. So looking at small business owners who may be along those 10 streets, for example, and making sure that we're kind of engaging them in the process. And so that could be a combination of with maybe a pop-up on that corridor, making sure that we're talking to the owner of the business on the corner, for example, understanding their loading needs, talking with them and having real conversations about what their business access is like.
Sure. To me, actually, that's the best engagement. That to me is the best engagement. I'm going to come back to that on my comments. But talking directly to the stakeholders versus through a third party. Why not include big businesses? The county hospital is actually our largest employer. Actually, I think it's the largest employer in the county. Fidelity, another very large employer. I don't see them on the list.
Yeah, I mean, it's a citywide engagement plan. And I shared earlier on, one of the goals is to make sure as many people know about this as possible. And so, through chambers or other means, we can certainly be spreading and hopefully, will be the online engagement and other factors as far and wide as possible. And so that's an opportunity for employees or employers to really engage with all of this material and make sure that they have an opportunity to participate as well. Again, it is a citywide plan. We want to make sure as many people know about this as possible. When it comes to like digging in on some of our resources for in-person engagement and things like that, we want to make sure that we're able to talk to people who are not as traditionally represented in the process. And so that's likely to be more of your small business owner versus a big business owner, for example, who may have less resources and ability to participate. So that's one of the reasons that they're called out, for example.
And
Well,
to
yeah.
add to Carrie's comment,
Yeah.
one of the questions for the commission is, are there additional stakeholders?
Well, that's the
that-
question I'm answering right now. I'm starting with that
Correct.
right now.
Keeping in mind, as Carrie mentioned, that if we are adding stakeholders, that may reduce our ability to reach out to other stakeholders.
Right, but your question is, are there additional stakeholders? And I'm bringing up some. The reality is if they don't know about it, the large businesses, then they can't participate. And they may want to. An additional stakeholder to consider, and Sue Ellen, you and I spoke about this afternoon, are families. These are families who parents work, they raise their kids, they might have a couple of teenage kids, they might have 2 to 4 cars. They could be low income, middle income, upper middle income. But they are not present at all at the table. And I'd like to know how you would reach out to them. And these are the people, like I said, they could have 2 to 4 cars because they've got kids in school, work. And they're all over the city. And this is a citywide plan. So that would be another additional stakeholder to consider. And they could be the ones, by the way, who could be losing their on-street parking.
Understood. We understanding that it's a citywide plan and that we do have a number of different target audiences. The families in the city do tend to fall within one of those audiences. In addition, tend to be involved in the schools in the community. So in engaging our public school districts, our high school district and our elementary and middle school district, we do hope not just to get feedback from the school district perspective, but also to be able to reach those families and engage with them at the site. So we do completely understand your comment, and we have seen that in prior engagement efforts. And that was one of the target areas where we were hoping to get to. But to your point, they're often not able to just come out and attend events. So we need to try to find access points through organizations they're already part of, through the school districts, through other means.
Right. And once again, they could be the ones that are going to lose their on-street parking in this. There could be the ones who could possibly lose part of their sidewalk. I don't know. But, and then one last question here I have, and this is always, I'm going to go back to the North Central, and I still think about this and I don't know the answer to it. And Sue Ellen, I actually thought you folks did some pretty good outreach on the North Central bike lanes. Okay, I remember pop-ups, focus panels. I even went to a meeting at the King Center because I wanted to see what was going on. Even though it's not my neighborhood, I live on the other side. I did attend some of these events. And so, yeah, despite the outreach that I saw staff do, which I thought was pretty comprehensive. And I remember us talking here on the commission, we thought it was comprehensive. But yet when we put the bike lanes in, there was enormous pushback. And so my question is to you, Carrie, is since the city's hiring your firm, how are you going to make sure that doesn't happen again? I don't even know, and I don't even know what happened. I don't know where the disconnect was, and maybe Sue Ellen, you don't, but I still think about that because I still hear about North Central because I go there a lot. But the thing is Carrie, what is your organization going to do to make sure we don't get into that situation again?
If you don't mind my responding first. The role of Fair and Peers as the prime consultant on this project is to develop the plan and to leave the plan development process with the city. And part of what we discussed in this presentation was that one of our challenges is that we're developing a citywide plan, very high level, thinking about these concepts for the entire city at one time. But when we come down to the nitty gritty, these projects are going to be implemented on roadways. They're going to be in front of families' homes, for example, in front of small businesses. So in looking back to the Bike Master Plan effort, we were in a similar situation where we're looking at a citywide network, but then when you come down to implementation, it's implementing on a roadway. And at the time of implementation is when those businesses, schools, residents on those roadways are going to feel those projects. So the best that we can do during the development of the plan is to try to have those conversations to try to identify where those big changes may be seen in the community when we're doing the project implementation. But it will not be the job of Fair and Peers or that team when we're doing the outreach on the individual project. At that time, it does fall to the city and our design and our identification of the community changes. What we're trying to do differently in this plan, because as Azalea mentioned, we learned a lot during that project. What we're trying to do as part of this plan is to have those difficult conversations up front and to try to identify as best we can the community changes that are going to occur at the project level so that we can have those conversations with the community, which is not something that we were able to effectively do during the Bike Master Plan.
Right.
To your question, I don't know that we can prevent it from happening again, but we can take the lessons that we learned and try our best to not have a similar situation.
Sure. See, I would bring in those stakeholders are going to lose and sidewalks, parking early during feasibility because they are part of the feasibility. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Michael.
Thank you. And thanks for your presentation today. Thought it was really helpful. I think Complete Streets is a great ambition, but it's still sort of a fuzzy idea that I think is hard to understand exactly how it'll play out. So some of my questions are, so this is a citywide plan you mentioned a couple times, but what is the scope? Is it every street that we're looking at in the city, or is it the types of common streets, or do you have areas you're going to be zoning into?
Yeah, I mean, it is truly citywide. And so one of the bases, and you'll start to see this, the next time we talk, and certainly throughout the engagement process, is really all of the modal plans that you've already done. So it's not necessarily every street, because maybe every street doesn't have a modal priority right now. Maybe there's some residential streets, for example, that just aren't part of those networks, for example. And so those may get less of a look at in the context of this plan, but maybe there's some, broad neighborhood traffic calming or things like that that could get looked at in the context of this plan. But it's really going to be focused on kind of what's in the pedestrian plan, the bicycle plan, the latest kind of Samtrans bus networks, your truck route network, for example, and then all the different many ways of the arterials and collectors and how autos navigate through the city, and making sure that those streets in particular that are high priority for all those modes are really getting a lot of attention through this process.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So it's where there's action already happening or going to be happening. It's sort of going to create design guidelines for those projects. So I'm wondering also about in the engagement. I'm curious, is the engagement subcontracted, or is that Fair and Peers? Is it subcontracted with local people, or is Fair and Peers taking that on?
Yeah, we have a subcontractor called Winter Consulting, and they are taking on that work. Their team has a variety of language capabilities, and they're actually focused on that in particular. So they're experts in engagement, and really have a great inclusive approach to how they'll be conducting that work.
Awesome. So when the outreach is done, is there already a set idea, like, of criteria, education? I could just see approaching people in all these great engagement processes, and everyone just says traffic, which doesn't necessarily translate to a complete street. So I guess, I don't know if it's a question or encouragement of just part of, I think the job is to get education out there about what we mean by complete streets and what the goal is of this effort.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's definitely consistent with conversations that we're having with the public works staff too, kind of thinking about developing almost just like an FAQ and just kind of some basic talking points, like what are we really talking about when we say complete streets? Because I think you're bringing up a good point of just like the legibility of that for the average community member, and making sure it's really clear and that they can have a sense of how best to participate in the process.
On the other side of that, my one idea for engagement that I've thought was very innovative that I've seen in San Mateo is sort of instant engagement, like sandwich boards, like on a street crossing, or the QR codes, on the sign of, oh, there I am. I've seen projects where you have a QR code and you could just put your, if you're on a run or whatever, put your phone on and see what's happening right then of areas that you actually walk and visit, but you have no idea there's a project planned for it. So I could sort of see like maybe even taking an instant survey, if you cross those points of, are you a resident? How did you get to this certain, mode of travel to this point? So anyway, that could be interesting. And then my last question is, as part of the priority areas, will that, or I guess a comment or a question, include like ideas for the low hanging fruit, like the quick builds, like what can we do quickly? Because as we know, all these projects, have sticker shock with them all the time. So if they have, it would be helpful if one of the results was these are quick builds or pilots that we could do, or low-hanging fruit that the city can manage without having to necessarily always go out for a large grant.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that will be really important to talk about in the context of that prioritization criteria we're talking about, because yeah, maybe you want to take those 10 concepts and say, like, what can we really do in the next 5 to 7 years? And have it be a much shorter time frame. Maybe you're like, yeah, that'd be great to do some fancy capital projects, but like we have plenty of those, already in the hopper. So it'd be great to have those conversations around kind of what is the timeline, how much should we factor in kind of cost or ease of implementation as part of that process and deciding which of those projects to focus on. And it's not spelled out at this point. That's certainly an option.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any input from the public, either
Sorry.
in the room or?
Through the chair, I'm sorry. I realized I had one quick question.
Okay, sure.
Is El Camino finally on the table, given the fact that there's interagency stuff happening with the Complete Streets plan?
It is on the table. Maybe going back to the first item, which I probably shouldn't do. We were part of a grant application with Samtrans, Belmont and San Carlos to look at El Camino and modal prioritization and Samtrans, et cetera. And we have been recommended for funding for that project. So we'll be able to come at El Camino from 2 different avenues.
All right. Anything from the public, Cookie?
I don't see any hands raised.
No yellow slips from our audience. So let's go to comments. And we'll start back down here with comments.
Great, thanks. This is incredibly exciting and looking forward to continued updates. Couple themes. So I want us to be mindful with the word co-creation. I think what you've outlined here is a incredibly lovely and incredibly collaborative process that meaningfully solicits feedback from the community. But I think in terms of best practices when it comes to equity and justice practices, co-creation, the word co-creation is a term of art that includes things such as like giving over power to the community, which I'm not hearing in this presentation. And it also includes sometimes even veto power in a way, like, I don't like that design, the community doesn't like the design, so we're not going to do that design, which again, I'm not hearing in this presentation. And these are not knocks on your approach at all. It's just a misalignment with the, I think, term of art of co-creation. So I just want us to be really mindful of that and not oversell what we're doing, because what you are doing is very, very meaningful engagement and collaboration, and just leave it at that. I want to go back to what I was kind of alluding to with the a more networked engagement model. I just want to emphasize this. I think this will help to assuage a lot of the concerns that myself and the rest of the commissioners have on engagement with folks that are just hard to identify. If you can identify community leaders or parent leaders or things like, or neighborhood association leaders who can serve as these hubs of disaggregated hubs, if you will, and provide feedback to the city or to the engagement team in a more structured manner, but like that is actually taking into consideration more than just their own personal feedback, right? So for instance, when it comes to parents in schools, I don't know how high schoolers do it. I don't have high schoolers, but I got a preschooler and we are very active on WhatsApp, and there's a parent leader in every classroom. There's 1 or 2 parent leaders in every classroom. So, and this is College Park, Turnbull. So for instance, like, what happens if you were to engage and ask, the parent leaders to like let folks know that this is happening, right? So that's the kind of disaggregated engagement that's like kind of guerrilla style that is very doable and also creates a lot of trust and accessibility because you already, with the folks you're trying to reach. So I'm sure there's other examples, but that's the one that's close to my heart right now. I'm also really, interested in and wanting to emphasize, reemphasize something that Commissioner Michael said about the outreach and education part of like simply educating people on what we're talking about here. I think that's a huge opportunity to do that. It's also a huge opportunity to engage people on what the heck Public Works even does too also, right? Which is a constant important thing to do. Because that continues to then justify our taxes and our, maybe other things that we're trying to do, like ballot initiatives in the future, right? So it's just another opportunity to continue to build the awareness in that front. I also thinking about like the engagement plan for engagement, and I had this question and in my email, but like I was thinking like, what is the role of social media? I loved Commissioner Michael's idea about the app or the instant, what did you call it? Like instant engagement. That was really cool. What's the role of earned media, right? Like a streets blog style or San Mateo, the Daily, or like what are those types of roles to get the word out? You have such a short timeline. So like these things just have to kind of get rolling out sooner than later and then constant. And so what can be done in that front? And then lastly, let me think. What was it? Oh, about the compensation. That's a wonderful practice, and I really hope this grant covers that. If it doesn't cover that, I would hope that a small amount of Gen Fund could be used, or a CDBG fund could be used, something, because we really do need to value people's time appropriately and honor their engagement and their services to the city, and when they're being asked to like provide their feedback in this way. So if the grant doesn't work out, I hope the city council can somehow help you if there's not, some discretionary funding within Public Works. Oh, and then lastly, the thing about the projects versus the citywide, I think that's really important to explain when doing the engagement, right? And maybe it's that the engagement feels or looks differently. And I guess because it's a plan, like this is a plan right now, it's hard for me to kind of visualize, but maybe don't talk about the projects until you're ready to talk about projects, right? Like, I don't know what exactly it is, but it is getting a little convoluted in my head. Like, oh, do you need the design? You need the design guidelines for the 10 projects, but you don't need to necessarily know the 10 projects to do the design guidelines, right? Like, I'm not sure. I'm just these are confusing things, but what we don't want to, I completely agree with Commissioner Runsky in that we don't want to create a situation where we're not ready for the feedback that we receive, and then it's not heard and honored, and somehow people can see how their feedback was taken into consideration, right? That's the most important thing. And so being mindful of that, because we're in some cases we are starting from that negative space. We're not starting from a ground zero. And that's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Riddlemeyer, or Commissioner Riddlemeyer. I apologize. That may not be an elevation.
Thank you. I'll take it, whichever. Thank you again. Really excited to see this move forward. I'm curious, you said that there are clear design standards for complete streets. Are those already existing, or is that something that's going to be developed from this whole outreach process?
We have some standard specifications in Public Works and some standards that there were standards developed for the pedestrian master plan as well for sidewalks that were identified as guidelines in that document, so that they're not necessarily able to be utilized as standards. So this project gives us the opportunity to have, first of all, up-to-date standards for all public realm improvements that are related to this plan, but also the opportunity to identify and adopt them as standards. For example, for sidewalk width for different land uses, or the way that a bike lane is designed or implemented, or how intersection improvements are implemented for certain areas.
Okay. Yeah, I just would echo what's been said already. In the public outreach, make very clear that there are these standards that exist, and maybe limit some people's vision. but I am really excited to see the outreach. I am a little, I know that it's going to cover a span of time, but I am a little bit concerned about the schools being out, summertime issue. Another way to reach to families, I would say, is maybe club teams. My kids at the age where club teams are a big thing. Once they get into, upper elementary, middle school, that's where you'll find a lot of the parents spending their time. And it can be swim teams, volleyball, basketball, and then also if it's during the summertime, then maybe camps. Especially if you're reaching out to businesses, it might be a gymnastics camp. And instead of just reaching to the owners of the business, have them reach out to the families that are going to the camp there over the summer. Might be a good way. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Owinski.
Sure. So, going back to additional stakeholders, I discussed, considering the county hospital. But I think just as important is families, raising kids, working 2 to 4 cars. And they come in all income stratas, but every one of them need to be spoken to. I would also include neighborhood associations. They do include renters, and they are an important now. And neighborhood associations, I think what's important to understand too is, for example, I'm a member of BHNA. At BHNA, we have roughly about 8% of our membership represents roughly 8% of homes. And these homes, of which half are rented and half are property owned. So here's my point is neighborhood associations should be included, but they are not a replacement for communicating with families who live in single family homes, be it rented or property owned, and all over the city, San Mateo Park, Shoreview, wherever they are. So neighborhood associations you should consider them, but they're not a substitute for reaching out to families who just don't have time. And then finally, I think, not to beat this one to death, because I brought it up during the, when we were talking about the bike plan, but is those businesses and property owners, renters who are going to be affected through the loss of some sort of infrastructure, they need to be brought in very early. And I think the city also needs to be very open to changing their plan based on their input. That is, you're not going in for the sake of speaking to them, but you're going in for the sake of speaking with them very early during the feasibility study or phase, if that's appropriate, before this stuff gets baked. Because I know as this stuff moves on, it gets baked in really well, and it's harder and harder to turn it around. But take those people's input genuinely, openly, and if necessary, accommodate and change.
Thank you. Commissioner.
I'm looking forward to seeing how this takes shape and hearing back about the engagement and just emphasizing, I think, basically what everyone else has said, but it'll be interesting to see what the plan results in, and it'll be tricky, but a challenge to have people understand exactly what they're engaging in, because it won't happen quickly or overnight, these changes. So that's just part of the challenge. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Just a couple comments on the plan itself. I would love to see more emphasis on the green infrastructure. I think it's an area that doesn't have as vocal constituency or an advocacy group, to be honest, where everybody wants to complain about not being able to ride their bike or not being able to park their car or whatever. They don't tend to think of the green infrastructure, but I think that's an important city function that will help us from a climate change point of view, as well as a beautification. And, if you're going to do a bulb out for traffic control, why not throw some plants in it if it can be done that way? The other, which is quick because it's I bring this up whenever I can. El Camino, no left turns during rush hour, period. It would make all the difference for the major artery of people. Not that I speak for Burlingame or Belmont, but a lot of San Mateo would benefit from that traffic flow, including neighborhoods that people now cut through. Get people off Maple, get people off Palm, if they can actually make something. Okay, that's that. Now, as to what you really wanted to know about, which is the draft community engagement plan. As a veteran of the general plan, traffic plans, gosh, going back to my park and rec days, I can't tell you how many pop-ups and things I've stood up at. What I find is that we tend to have those things and talk about the entire city, and that's good. You know, we have the posters of everything that's going on, but I think we need to recognize that local folks will come out if there's a local geographic spot, you know, and something nearby because people are busy. And I think particularly people where English is a second language, you know, they're going to feel more comfortable coming to the neighborhood, to the King Center or to whatever facility or even a church or whatever is appropriate nearby. But also their primary interest is what's happening locally, as I think was mentioned earlier on. That doesn't mean we shouldn't also have some part dedicated to what's going on around the city to get input. But I think it's fair to expect that a significant portion of any of these events should be focused on the local, and you'll get more meaningful input anyway from the people who actually walk and drive those not so mean streets, but that we have. And those are all my comments. Anybody have anything else? You know, we're actually doing okay on time, so I don't want to perpetuate it, but thank you very much. Excellent. And hopefully that was some meaningful feedback. And thanks to all the commissioners. It was great. Moving on, we're not too much left. There's reports and announcements. Everybody should have gotten the crystal ball, which acts as a announcement. I am going to step up and with one of my other hats, because I'm chair of the general plan subcommittee, let people know that the general plan subcommittee will be meeting. It hasn't been announced yet, but somewhere probably June or July. And I would love for folks here to show up or let others know. What we have found is that the all or nothing people tend to show up. And you know, I love the advocates, but it's YIMBY everywhere, NIMBY everywhere. And it would be nice to have folks who are engaged, like everybody at this dais is, whatever your views are, to come and give those views. And anybody listening, the 2 people in the audience and the few online, please come when that comes out. Does staff have any, I know Azalea is on the call, any announcements or anything we need to know?
Yes, if I can, if you can hear me. Yes, so like to let you know that we will be activating the Emergency Operations Center tomorrow, given the wet weather that's headed our way. We have asked our crews to change their schedules, so we will actually be splitting our maintenance crews. They will be covering a 12-hour shift in during the day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and we'll have half of the crews come in at 7 p.m. and cover the night. It will start raining tomorrow, and it will be more intense through the night. So we will be answering phones, and we've got our admin staff who are going to help us through the night. So we are preparing. The EOC will be open. We have a lot of sand bags that residents can get at the courtyard and also at Seal Point Park. And we are asking residents to prepare. The prediction is for 1 inch of rain tomorrow and another inch the following day. But as we all experience, those predictions can change very rapidly, and we're just being very cautious based on our experience last January.
So if I can, let's see, the sandbags are available Seal Point,
And
off Clinton Drive, and also at the Corp Center, which is on Pacific, right?
Right. Yes.
And then emergency facility is at the event center. That's the county, is the city also?
Yes, we
Right.
will be. I have to confirm this, but we are supposed to have a temporary evacuation center. And last time that was City Hall. And that is a place where residents can go and get information on how to obtain actual shelter if they need to.
Okay. Yeah, that would be a very valuable, because I think it is the county that's using the event center. But if you're closer to the event center and you have a problem, that's where you should go. And Samaritan House, another hat I wear, is going to be supporting that effort as well. Anything from any other commissioners? No, fantastic. Thank you. Good meeting. We are adjourned.